Hello and welcome to this session. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you especially to the panel members who I'll introduce in a moment. I'm Mairi, Gregory, a Deputy Director in the Office for Statistics Regulation. And in OSR, we think we've got quite a unique perspective on the UK statistical system, which gives us an insight into the demands on the system, expectations from users, and what producers are doing to try and meet some of those expectations. So we've brought together a few users and producers of statistics to have a discussion about how things have changed over recent months. Initially, we envisaged this session being a follow-up to the Treasury Select Committee inquiry into imbalances in the economy. But as many of you will know, a lot has changed since then. And we therefore have changed this session slightly to focus a little bit more on how things have changed during the pandemic. Like many organisations, we in OSR have changed our approach, and we've worked to try and be more supportive. We worked to turn things around more quickly, and we've worked to focus on the impact we can have given that stretch in resources. And I think probably a lot of organisations have done similar. And what we've really noticed is changes in the expectations of those using economic data and changes in the approaches taken to produce that data. So I think we've learned a lot and we've gained a lot of insights, and it's prompted probably more questions because of having more data. So I'm going to hand over to the panel in a moment and ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about what they've learned during the pandemic and as a result of these changes in the way data have been used and the needs around that. And then we'll continue with the discussion about the data from the panel, and we'll take any questions through the Q&A. So to introduce the panel members, we've got Iain Russell, who is the lead regulator on the economy in the Office for Statistics Regulation. We've got Darren Morgan from the Office for National Statistics. We've got Mairi Spowage, who is a Deputy Director at the Fraser and Allender Institute, and we've got Andrew Carter from the Centre for Cities. And each of them is going to give you a few early reflections, starting with Iain, and then we'll move on to the discussion and Q&A. So Iain, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mairi. So just some reflections about how our working and our operations have changed during the pandemic. So we quickly adapted the way that we work and the methods that we use to best regulate statistics that are within our remit. So we introduced some new tools, something we called a rapid review. So this was particularly reviewing the new statistics that have come out as a consequence of the pandemic in different domains, in the economy domain, also in health, of course, and in society. We've also developed position statements to try to describe our position on particular statistics and new ones. So for instance, we have position statement in respect to the R number, which is produced on a regular basis. So they've already been used, these reviews and position statements, on multiple occasions. And they give us a new perspective on the new statistics and new data that are coming out. One of the areas that we found, obviously, with the speed of development of information and data, is that sometimes information can get ahead of the normal ways of disseminating that information. So, for instance, we found that some management information which has been needed for informing government's response to the pandemic has been released before it's been discussed, before it's actually being described in the public domain. So we've intervened on some of those occasions to talk to statistics producers about the ways in which they provide supporting data that comes behind ministers' use of management information in public debate. And we've set out our expectations of and producers on those occasions. So our expectations, for instance, include equality of access. So when management information is used publicly to inform Parliament or the media and the public, it should be published in an accessible form with appropriate explanations of the context and the sources. And when it's quoted, management information, material to the public domain, we'll consider whether a public intervention to highlight any failure to preserve equality of access has taken place. But we will be proportional. So we will look at the difference between, say, a one-off use that's marginal to the issues of interest compared to those which we think are material to public debate. So it's an example where we've intervened to try to make sure that the information that's been provided for decision making is also available for the public and for the media and for wider users to be able to assess and judge that information. Also, the first 6 months, first 3 or 4 months, in fact, of this year, we saw more casework than we previously received in the whole year. And a proportion of that casework relates to economic statistics in an area in which many people would be interested. So casework is where someone has contacted us about a concern or an issue about official information or statistics, and we follow that up. We also have the ability to identify that for ourselves. And as I say, a lot of our work during the first 3 months of the financial year has been around looking at that casework and going through casework to see whether there are areas that we could intervene to improve the value, quality, or trustworthiness of official statistics. Before the pandemic, we knew that users of regional statistics, so for instance, local authorities, chambers of commerce, government, lobby groups, wanted data available quickly. They wanted more granular data, often down to local authority level. And they wanted the ability to more flexibly use that data. And so we know those are going to be ongoing needs. And to a large extent, I suppose, the first of those, definitely having data made more quickly, has been one of the highlights of the pandemic, or one of the upsides of an awful situation, if you like. And that's been something that I think will come out of the discussion this morning. In terms of regional imbalances, I suppose the classical economic view of imbalances is that they're centered around income, jobs, living standards. But we've seen imbalances evident in many more areas. So for instance, some recent IFS work showed imbalances including wealth, productivity. But I think experience of looking at imbalances shows that it's a far more complicated picture than simply north versus south. Inequalities are more diverse, they're more pernicious in some respects across the geographies of the UK. So some of the highlights of what we've learned, for instance, HMRC has produced really interesting statistics about the application and eligibility for their job retention schemes. So that's the coronavirus job retention scheme and the self-employment income support scheme, showing the take-up of grants and showing that the lower rate of take-up in the London and South East, for instance, which is quite interesting. The reasons for differences in eligibility for the job retention schemes. And that could be a rich area of research at some point in the future and may provide new insights into the differences between the regions. So I think there's a lot more that can come from that rich resource over time. Obviously, one of the areas that a lot of people have been interested in is the area of home working and whether there's differences across the regions in the ability, the capability of being able to work from home and what the impacts of home working are on the different economies. And we're seeing that particularly, of course, at the moment in terms of the London economy. where home working appears to be one of the contributors to the slower response or recovery from the impact of the lockdown. And ONS, of course, have produced some interesting statistics about home working, which we can see. I think also ONS have produced some really interesting stuff about the digital divide. So is the digital divide and the regional divide something that overlaps? Or is in fact the differences between different geographies in the UK something more to do with digital access than it is to do just with the fact of where a region is in our geography? So I mentioned earlier faster indicators. Throughout the pandemic, there's been a need for faster, more timely data that can capture what current circumstances look like in a very changing world. Obviously, ONS's faster indicators experimental series, we conducted a rapid review of those new indicators, including the business impact of COVID survey early after ONS first produced them, and we endorsed the production of those statistics, and they've been really valuable in informing the impact of the pandemic, and also, of course, in terms of the recovery from lockdown measures going forward. But I guess one of the questions is, are these faster indicators here to stay, or are they just here during this time? And are they something that can coexist with the diet of the annual releases of economic statistics, and what are the positives and negatives of continuing with those? And I've been hearing yesterday when I was a participant in a number of sessions about different countries' use of faster indicators, and about the views on whether those will continue. And I found that's a really interesting debate. Alternative data sources, another thing that's been noticeable during the pandemic so far. Examples, of course, are ONS in terms of measuring education output, have utilized a new data source during the COVID-19 to account for the hours of classroom teaching. And they've used an online data app called Teacher App to help them measure that. Use of things like energy performance certificates indicative of property registrations and housing transactions, the use of companies' house data in new registrations of businesses, and payments data from Barclays, in inflation estimates using lockdown weight. So that's been a highlight, I guess, that application of alternative data sources. And I suppose I asked the question whether, is it an example that necessity is the mother of invention, and why has it taken something like a worldwide pandemic to spur that innovation? I mean, in some respects, I just welcome it, but it is interesting why it's been so prevalent now. But not everything can be adapted. Some statistics can't be adapted. There aren't alternative data sources. An example, I guess, is the retail sales figures. So we know from the UK figures that the moves towards online purchasing have been quite stark. But what we can't see from the data, there isn't the ability to break that down into regions or to lower geographies underneath the UK. And it would be really useful to know if there's an even switch from high street shopping to online across the UK, and what regions are being hardest hit, and are there any trends across the geographies. So those are just some of the insights, Mary, that I think we've picked up from the work that we've been doing and from our discussions with others. And I really look forward to hearing other panel members' experiences and hearing the insights we'll get from questions that, that people might want to ask. That's it, thanks.
Thank you very much, Iain. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, so I'm going to pass over to Darren to give a few reflections, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of those questions in the discussion later.
Yes, thanks, Mairi and Iain. Thanks, and good morning, everybody. It's a really weird world saying good morning to a screen, but I'm sure there's lots of people out there listening, I hope. And as Mairi introduced me, so I'm Darren Morgan. I'm a director, I have the privilege of being the director of economic statistics here at the Office for National Statistics. And what a 6 months it's been, hasn't it? I mean, it's been, I'm not sure what the right adjective is. Is it tragic, depressing, challenging? I think all those come to mind. I think it's fair, but I wonder if you let me take you back, at least a year or so before the pandemic, to perhaps put some things the last 6 months into context. So what users used to tell us consistently, and it was sort of confirmed in the independent review of economic statistics, the Bean review, our users, including Andrew and Mairi, I'm sure we want some of these keep telling us they want things faster, they want things more granular, they want things more flexible in terms of geography. You know, the natural regions are a thing of the past, but I accept that's not for everybody. And there were gaps things that we weren't measuring that we should be covering. So we've been working hard over the last couple of years to sort of respond to that. So in terms of faster indicators, we now have quarterly GDP for the English regions and Wales to complement Scottish government and Northern Ireland's government estimates. We moved our annual publications quicker by a year. And our colleagues actually in ESCoE, our partners in ESCoE, they've done some really clever work in terms of now casting some quarterly output indicators, basically the same time as our national indicators. So some great work on faster indicators, more granular. We now publish down to 81 industries, I think, at the top level, and even at local authority level on the output side, measuring output, we published down to 34 industries, which is good stuff. Geographical, like I said, anything down to local authority we can do in the most now, and then we can build them back up. So we do combined authorities with elected mayors, local enterprise partnerships. We do growth deals where they are, and so on. So we've responded there, and there's gaps. So I think we're the first country in the world to publish a measure of output based on the income approach. We're measuring income, and then measuring production, and then balancing to produce the best estimate. So I think we're the first country in the world to do that as well. But again, my friends, I'm sure some of them will be on the call, including, like I said, Andrew and Mairi, they said, yes, Dan, that's fantastic, isn't it? But we want more. You haven't gone further. And that's fair, actually. There was still a lot more to do in current times. But then the pandemic, hit, didn't it? And then that just changed everything sort of overnight. Quarterly data, which we thought was pretty good in the past, that just wasn't good enough anymore. You know, people wanted more up-to-date data. And it's just changed the landscape completely, very quickly. So some of the things on reflections, what we've done, we put into the field a fortnightly survey of around 25,000 businesses to collect information. That's very flexible. So Iain said earlier about collecting online and high street from retailers. We could actually do that. You know, in the next section block, we could put another set of sections in to ask that information. And we've been doing that to monitor how the pandemic has evolved over the last 6 months, changing the questions that we ask. But although this fortnightly, a survey, we publish every week. So it's sort of a weekly update on things. And there's lots of information that we publish on that. And Iain's mentioned a few of them. But we also have online job adverts now. They're sort of weekly. We have the energy, so giving an indication of the labour market. We also have energy performance certificates, as Iain mentioned, that give an indication of the housing market. That's weekly. We have traffic cameras, give an indication of penetration in terms of the town centres and cities. So a lot has happened in the last sort of 6 months in data that's almost, you know, close to real time, probably as reasonable as you can expect. That's evolved, and it'd be interesting to hear people's views on why that has been able to happen actually and haven't. My reflection is, you know, and I think it came up in a couple of sessions I was at yesterday, we became less precious, to be completely candid with you. You know, it was our priority initially always, and it still is to a certain extent, of course, is accuracy. But that perhaps sometimes that came at the cost of taking some risks around innovation. With the pandemic, that probably balance of risk changed a little bit in terms of that. And in terms of impact on industry, there's been a few ways to do on that in terms of reflections. Before the pandemic, as Iain said again, I think the imbalances and inequalities across the country, it's not as simple as north and south. It's not as simple as towns and cities. It's quite a lot more nuanced than that, I think. And I think in terms of the impact the pandemic have had is that the restrictions that people have had is, I'm just looking now, restrictions people have had, some industries have been hit harder than others, obviously. So if you're in an area that's been dominated by hospitality or the arts and entertainment, you've been hit, that those areas have been hit particularly hard because of those are the industries that are still being impacted by the restrictions that are in place. The other one is that actually is sort of footfall. So if you're in a town or city where there is, where there's sort of areas where people can, industries within that area that people can work from home, then you have been hit. Iain used London as a classic example, actually, and it is obviously the best example, but there are others. The other interesting piece, actually, in the Financial Times did a great piece of this last week, bringing all data together. And I think they use some of Andrew's data actually from his organisation. But another key factor is actually how people commute. So it isn't just about footfall. So if you're in a town or city that you can get to by car, or you can walk, or you can cycle, they have tended to perform better than people where you have to use public transport, because people are still are concerned about using public transport. So that's a really interesting dimension, actually, in terms of how the dynamic of change and how different towns and cities have been hit, which was quite nuanced for me. But the big question for me, I think, I've been reflecting when I knew I was coming on here, is that is this temporary? Is this change temporary? Because London has been held up as an exemplar in terms of performance on the regional basis for lots of reasons, but it's been the hardest hit probably and the slowest to recover over the last few months. And other parts are similar. Is that going to persist now, or is it temporary? We'll wait to see. And
that's a great question to finish on, and again I think we'll be coming back to that. But next, Mairi, do you want to give a few of your reflections, which may even include some answers to some of the questions already posed?
Yeah, sure. So our focus at the Fraser Valander Institute has been on using some of the innovative sources that have already been mentioned to try and get some insights for regional impacts of the pandemic and associated lockdown. And we're working with devolved governments in the UK and local government, and even some smaller areas to try and understand what the impacts might be, as they're quite quickly trying to think about economic recovery and how to support that. So it's been a really interesting process. And I think that for example, we've used a lot of different sources, but obviously the monthly GDP from the UK government from the ONS has been really useful. And I think if anyone doubted the value of something like monthly GDP, that's been dispelled completely by the pandemic and the need to understand the economy on a monthly basis. But we've also used the further indicators work for the ONS to sort of model possible impacts for these different levels of geography. Obviously, innovations have also happened from other stats producers like the Scottish Government, who've also produced monthly GDP now, which has been quite helpful when we're looking at areas of Scotland. And we can use this in conjunction with other information around things like furlough to try and give some insight into the differential impact of on different areas that might be possible. So this insight's been essential for formulation of economic recovery strategies, as I mentioned, with economic policymakers at different levels really hungry for some sort of insight into what the differential impact might be on their area. And so they can have some understanding of the policy measures that they should put in place. And just coming back to something that Darren mentioned about stakeholders' needs, and we want more. In terms of needs, as I think Andrew will probably cover as well, the focus for me should be on provision of information for the level of decision making that exists in this country and the level of devolution, rather than necessarily more and more smaller geographies or granularity. I'll just stick that one out there. And what we've found is, in general, areas that were already kind of vulnerable prior to the pandemic will be suffering more. I mean, in general, that happens. That's a feature of many economic crises, but it's certainly going to be a feature of this one, based on the insights we've managed to gather so far. And this provides a challenge, obviously, for policymakers who have a wish to level up in the recovery from the pandemic. It just makes it harder, I think, to try and achieve some of those aims. However, we do need to continue to remind policymakers that these are insights and they are not measurement. That measurement will come later and may not always line up with the initial insights that we get from the sorts of work that we are trying to do to model down to regional levels. And the nature of some of these indicators may mean that some of them give conflicting messages, about what might be happening in sectors versus what might be happening on furlough, given that the summer residence versus employment base. These are important distinctions and caveats to give around this information so that policymakers understand kind of what we're giving them to inform their immediate recovery plans. But overall, I've been very positive about the measures that statistical producers have made to try and innovate during this difficult period. And I think that I would hope that these faster indicators are here to stay, but it doesn't mean that we don't need the more considered measurement and time. So as ever, as a stakeholder, we want more, Darren.
What a surprise.
Thank you very much. And Andrew, I think, will now give us a few reflections as well,
Yeah.
and then we'll take questions from...
Oh, brilliant. So much of what I was going to say has been said. So it's to repeat and reiterate very, very briefly. You know, and we're kind of straddling, I suppose, the space between producer and user. And, you know, in that space, we're both trying to think about data analysis to help understand what's going on. But as Mairi said, to actually influence and provide that data and analysis to the ultimate decision maker. And I think that does have implications. So, you know, Darren said it. I mean, at the Centre for Cities, we're a massive, huge user and incredible fan of what the ONS have been doing, not just in the last 6 months, but over the last, you know, few years. So, I mean, I say that definitely. And, you know, Darren and Richard and colleagues, etc. You know, we are super users and super fans of that. But Darren's point about, you know, we want more, I think is an important point to reflect on, because in a sense, local users, city leaders, they do want more, but in part they want more because they're expected to do more. And I think that's an important, it's not just a demand in absence of, it's demand because of a requirement, which then relates to, you know, the agenda that we've had for, you know, the last period, which is, you know, a real recognition that we need to tackle spatial inequalities, you know, that we're at the extreme end when you compare us to other OECD countries across a number of indicators. So we have this kind of spatial variation. We also have a kind of onus that part of the response to that is devolution and giving more power and responsibilities. And therefore, you know, we need to give those decision makers at different scales the information and the understanding they need in order to make the decisions that they, you know, they ideally want to make. So I think that's an important connection to make. It's not just that we all desire it for its own sake. There are real reasons why that demand has been increasing in some respects. So I think 3 very quick reflections on then how that demand has sort of manifested itself. So on the one hand, you know, the geography and the spatial scale at which the information, the data is provided really does matter. You know, and I would say it's not that it's got no value, but regional data to the Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester is really of quite limited value to him in deciding A, what's going on in Greater Manchester, and B, what he should do about it. And that applies on the COVID side and on the health issues, and obviously on the economy side. So it's a kind of, you know, regional, yes, better than national, obviously, but actually in terms of informing the decisions that leader makes, still of quite limited, you know, limited than we would ideally want. So the geography and the scale, I think, really does matter whether we're building up or bringing down, as Darren said. I think that's really important. The second thing, obviously, is what we've seen, particularly in periods of quite rapid change associated often with economic shocks, is a demand for real-time information and information in a broader sense. You know, what the heck is going on? How can I mix and marry information that is being provided to me by, you know, official users or unofficial users to get some handle on that? You know, so you've seen, you know, places repurposing information around car parking spaces as a kind of measure of busyness, as Darren already said. We've been using and providing mobile phone signals as a kind of measure for busyness or for footfall, you know, to try and give some handle about what's moving on, or indeed, you know, we've been using card transaction data to get a handle on spend and how that is recovering and how that sort of plays out. So the second sort of demand, as well as the geography, is in real time, and it's not to replace official statistics, and that's not the point, but it's trying to at least give some insight. And so, you know, some of the movements around the furlough data that we've seen have been welcome. I think we could probably go further on some of those sorts of things, but that's definitely been a real demand, and I don't see that going away. Yes, we're in a shock environment, the demand for real time, I think, is here. And then my third final point would be, what you also observe is a kind of huge variance really around capacity and capability. So capacity and capability within local authorities, across local authorities, within combined authorities and such, just to deal with information that is provided to them. I mean, not doing necessarily even their own analysis. Many don't have the resources that they had obviously 10 or 15 years ago for the reasons we get into. So there's a kind of real capacity and capability to receive the information and the data analysis and before you kind of worry about that. And you've seen lots of places or different places, Newcastle, good example, where they've lent on and borrowed from existing networks and relationships. Newcastle Council had a very good relationship with the Newcastle University. That's been brought to the fore now to try and deal with, how we resolve some of the capability and capacity questions that are obviously within the local authority because they're off doing other things. So I think those will be my kind of very quick reflections on how that demand has changed. The geography question, the real-time issue, and then obviously the capability and capacity to respond. And we should be mindful about all of those sorts of things as we roll out in this agenda. And I'll finish there.
Thank you very much. I think there's some really good challenges there to Darren, especially as a key producer, but to lots of other organisations as well. We'll now take questions, so do use the Q&A box, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screens, to type in any questions you've got, and we'll take them probably two at a time. But while people are putting those in, I'll start with a question for the panel. And one of the questions Iain posed in his kickoff was, are faster indicators here to stay? My feeling from what the other three panel members said is yes, to an extent. But I was wondering if you'd like to expand a little bit more on what are some of the challenges and risks around that and how you might mitigate them, either you as the producer, Darren, and what you think in terms of those using them should do, Andrew and Mairi. So you mentioned the capability and capacity concerns. Well, how can Darren help make sure that we alleviate some of them? So I'll start with Darren again and then come on to the others.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I think it's a key question actually of the day. And in short, I think they are here to stay. Absolutely. I mean, we've just done a user consultation on our fortnightly survey, the business impact of the coronavirus survey, and there's clearly demand in terms of continuing that in some form. And we've seen the coverage it gets and how it's used. We can definitely see it, that they're here to stay. In what form though? I think that is up for discussion and debate actually, and it's with our users, not just us. Is fortnightly sufficient? I think it will be for a while. We've got Brexit, as well coming up. So I think people will want the fortnightly survey, but in normal times, would perhaps a monthly survey perhaps be be suitable? Who knows? So I think they're here to stay. In terms of its frequency, I think that will still be a discussion point, and we can flex it actually. The flexibility, we can flex the periodicity and frequency of it if we need to. And the challenges around it, a couple of things. One is I think Mairi touched on actually in her remarks about how they complement or not our official established statistics. And sometimes it can create tensions. I mean, it's early days yet, but I can see how they may cause tensions as they mature a little bit of faster indicators. So how do you manage that? Well, you try to harmonize the methods between both as much as you can, the sample, the register, and so on. You can do that, but I'm sure that Andrew and Mairi will have other views as a user on what we can do there. The other thing is time series. The big strength of the survey is that we can change the questions almost every fortnight. And that's really good in one dimension. But the negative side of that is that you don't necessarily then have a time series that matures and see over time. So I can see going forward that we may have a sort of a block of questions that are probably stable, perhaps to mitigate it, but then we will sort of pivot around that stability with questions of the day and try to balance both off. So year to stay, there are going to be some challenges around it though, but I think we've got some ideas already about how we might mitigate that, but it'd be great to hear other views.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with, I agree with Darren in the sense, I think they are here to stay. I think that, in a sense, the genie is out. So the question now is, how do we best ensure that they're used appropriately and sensibly, And I think, as you know, as Darren was saying, I think on the one hand, you know, the real-time stuff over time, because obviously some of these are genuinely new, so we don't know. You know, I think there's a question about the degree to which they can be and are calibrated to more official statistics that over time you see, you know, that they may be leading indicators of a different type or they actually aren't. So there's a calibration question, and I think official statistics will be hugely helpful, you know, giving us some confidence as to whether this data is just all noise, or whether it's actually, you know, is able to tell us something that we feel a bit more comfortable about. And then related to that, I would say, and this partly relates to my kind of capacity and capability point earlier on, you know, I think there is a requirement then for a little bit of marshalling of the real-time indicator space, if I can call it that, where, you know, we will need to be a little bit more, or we'll need to be clearer on the limitations of and the downsides, as well as, you know, the upsides, in a sense that the worry would be that real-time indicators are proposed and promoted by those that control the real-time indicator, and so it's all on the upside and none on the downside. And I think, you know, understanding that and then offering some more wise and careful kind of commentary about, well, yes, you can look at these, or we can think about this, but let's be aware of what it is telling us or what it's not telling us. And I think that's, we can't rely on, or we shouldn't assume that the user, however you define that, is going to be able to do that. I think there is a third party intermediary requirement, whoever that is. I think the ONS have a role to play, but I think other institutions can play a role as well, as being sort of the commentators and just the watchers of how this information is getting used, and you know, to work with the ultimate users on how they think about and use those indicators. So those would be my kind of two thoughts on that.
Thank you. Mairi, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I suppose I would agree with everything Andrew said, and yeah, I mean, I think they are here to stay. As Darren pointed out, perhaps not quite in the same form. That, you know, there are uses that can be made of some of the data that we've tried to use, sort of stick together time series to try and get insights into the recovery of sectors and things like that. And already you can see that they aren't quite, you know, when you then look back, the calibration questions are a really interesting one to see how good are they at these sort of predicting the level of recovery in different sectors and that sort of thing. I think the understanding of what they cover and what they don't cover is really important. You know, the sectors that aren't covered by BICS, for example, or the nature of the furlough stats is, you know, it's really important that users understand these, given there isn't, you know, not all employment's eligible for furlough, for example, and it's important to understand that as well. So there are a number of things that users, and it is a more complex kind of landscape when you're trying to look at these sort of faster indicators, given their partial nature. But it doesn't mean that they can't give you some insights, but it does make it more complex. I think there's always a tension between fast kind of growth kind of indicators from a base that you're confident in and updating that base. And I think that tension might come to a head with more local data, when, you know, there might be delays to the sort of more established, so regional GVA data, in order to facilitate the production of these faster indicators. You know, users are happy now, but will they be happy when, you know, they don't appear in December? Probably not. And that's the nature of dealing with users sometimes. But, you know, it is a tension that the ONS are going to have to manage to ensure that you have those baselines being updated on a regular enough basis that you're confident that they still represent the structure of the economy, but providing these faster indicators. And it isn't easy. And I say this as a former statistical producer as well. I know it's not easy, but you know, there will be a demand for both of these things to continue.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come on to the next question. Well, the first is an observation, so I'll start with letting Martin Wheel tell us his observation, and feel free to just add in a question there if you want to.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting set of questions that you've raised. Could I say, as a data user, that on the question of rapid indicators, of course, the private sector, various organisations in the private sector have produced these, and one observation as someone who's done some work with these data is that some organisations like the CBI are extremely cooperative and take the view that to have people studying their data, at least I assume, take the view that to have people studying and working on their data helps with those data. Other producers, I think one would have to say, are rather less cooperative and almost lead to the suspicion that they have something to hide. So for me, one of the great virtues of the ONS moving into this area is that while you may have become less precious about accuracy, I'm confident that you won't be less precious about making the data available and matching them up to the other surveys that you have, which is really absolutely essential if one wants to take a measured approach to assessing the quality of these data. So, I must say, as a researcher in the area, I'm very pleased to see that you are now producing rapid data, and I look forward to the opportunity to be able to do some work on them.
Thank you very much. I think Darren looks like you might be about to respond.
Yeah, if I can just thank you, Martin. And I just want to publicise, take the opportunity to publicise actually, because we did try to publicise it, but you never want to miss an opportunity, because I think it is important, the points Martin made about making the data available to users, because we've done this so quickly. The more people that can look at the data and research and ask questions, and the better actually. So we do, I think we published on a Thursday, we just published hopefully a couple of hours ago, hopefully they've gone out in the wide world. I think by the following week, early the following week, Monday or Tuesday, we put the data into the micro database available. So the micro data, it does become available from the big survey to everybody to access if they so wish. So we've done that. We did that quite quickly. I think we took about 4 or 5 weeks to do that, but now it's on a rolling period where we do it after every publication. So just to be aware that if people do want to get below the surface of the public results that we publish, that data is available.
Thank you. We've got a couple of linked questions coming up. So one person with no mic, I'll read out Craig McLaren's question, and then we'll go on to John Jeremy's question. So from Craig, he says, is there a risk of so many different competing indicators trying to measure the same thing? With different approaches to regional breakdowns and methods, it becomes challenging to understand which one to use and or to focus on. I'll go to John next to ask his related question and then come back to the panel.
It doesn't look like he's able to unmute.
Okay, in which case I will read out his question as well. And then just as a warning, I'm going to start with Iain from the panel. So John says, thank you for the interesting insights. We've talked a little about demand on data going up and scrutiny going up. One panelist mentioned that some indicators may contradict each other at this point until we get final estimates. How do we manage the messaging around this? John says his thoughts are that seeing these contradictions could lead people to lose confidence in some of these estimates if there is inconsistency. We can understand the reasons for these inconsistencies, but the general public may not. So I'm going to start with asking Iain, as a regulator of statistics, if he's got any thoughts on these issues, and then come to the rest of the panel.
I do think there is a risk that there could be contraindicators and difficulty in being able to interpret across a very varied suite. And therefore, I would say that there's a strong need for commentators and aggregators to be able to bring these together and try to find things which are indicative of some common features in them, and also perhaps highlight for users the areas where there are some contradictions and where producers and others need to provide more data on that. So yeah, I think there is a risk, but I'm confident that there are enough commentators and the likes of the works of Fraser of Allender, where Mairi's from, and various other think tanks and academics are producing that kind of analysis and raising some of those questions and feeding back to statistics producers to help direct where the next level of development might be to try and resolve some of those contradictions.
Thank you. Would Mairi like to come back on that?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I guess some of my concerns are around things like the use of the furlough stats to try and infer what the implications might be for local economies. given that you know, not all employment's eligible, as I said. So if there's a high level of public sector employment, that obviously will affect things. And also, that's residence based rather than, you know, employment based, like the economic measures are going to be. So when we've produced some insights on a sectoral basis, they don't always match up with the household measures, or maybe on UC claimants or on furlough. And I just think it's important for us to start to explain these things. And it's incumbent on us to understand how these measures are actually built, and therefore how what we're seeing in these faster indicators might actually manifest itself in the end in the economic data, particularly when you're dealing with trickier areas like how the public sector is measured, and how that might kind of soften a perceived blow or to a local economy. So I think yeah, all we can do is as commentators on this data, and maybe we have more of a role here than the ONS in a way, because we can interact with our audience more, to sort of explain that you know, this is not necessarily going to manifest itself quite in the way people think when you actually look at the measurement of economic data. So I guess we all have a role here to help explain how this might actually come out in the end.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, you know, kind of agree. I'm probably slightly more relaxed about the plurality of you know, of different things going on. That's not to say that we shouldn't be stringent in dealing with, you know, inappropriate uses of or promotion of data and all the rest of it. But I think, you know, the more you get into different aspects of the economy, for example, and the more, you know, you're looking at, I mean, we look at sort of, you know, combinations of local authorities, individual, you know, there is a hell of a lot going on between them and sometimes within them. It's not always easy to determine what's going on, even if the data is absolutely solid and sound and is given the full kite mark from ONS, etc. So that, you know, I think we need to be mindful about that. But I suppose my other point on the last question, I think, was, it seems to me that at least through COVID now, we have many more people that are at least reasonably familiar with what the R is, not the number, but what R actually represents, right? Given probably before COVID, no one knew what the R was. And, you know, so I'm not going to overstate how much that's permeated into society at large, but it has permeated to a degree. And I think there is, you know, that tells us something about the public purpose and the public education role that institutions like the ONS and others have, which is actually explaining what the data is, not just what the data says. In a sense, sometimes we jump immediately to, let me tell you about the finding. It's like, okay, let me show you how this plays out. Well, hang on, there's a role for saying, what is it this data is? And again, goes back to my earlier point, what's the limitations of, what are the confidence levels we should have, how confident should we be, et cetera, et cetera. But explaining what the data is, not just what it says, is a requirement. And I think you've seen some interesting examples through the media, not exclusively, but through the media, through the COVID, where I think that's been reasonably successful. Again, I'm not going to overstate that, but I think we've got something to build on there, I think.
And Mairi, can I just make a very quick remark? A perfect segue, Andrew said, because I think it is a risk, and I think it'll become a hot topic as we go forward. But I think it's a collective effort. I think we have a role, exactly as Andrew said, in terms of the data is. And I think Mairi is right in a way in that the users, particularly our more sophisticated users, have a role then in terms of explaining this is what it tells us and what it doesn't tell us. So I think it's a collective effort here, and I think it will come to materialize, because I think that this will become an issue as we move forward the next 6 months or so.
Thank you. We have a much more specific question from Keshab, who hopefully will be able to unmute. Let's see.
Hi. Hi. Very nice to hear you. I missed most of your talk, but anyway, I am working in some issues on UK economy, impact of taxes, transport and income distribution, growth, capital formation, like that sort of issues, and sometimes focusing on regional economies. Now, ONS has the regional GBA, but I find it difficult to find these regional input-output tables, which are the intersectoral linkages, and also the distribution of income as there are some from the Department of Work and Pension that ONS has put them there, but for reasons, that economic reasons, they don't exist, I think, or I have not seen it. So do you have some, maybe, I mean, this is my ignorance, I don't know the proper sources. Could you give me some suggestions where to get and look for this data or where to find them? That is my question. Thank you.
So maybe like if that's one, that one's for me, I guess. Didn't come in.
Yeah, anyway.
So Kashyap, you've not missed anything actually, and you've identified that basically the promised land for us in terms of input-output tables on a regional basis. You're not missing anything. We don't have them yet, and the main reason for that is that we have some gaps in order to produce them, particularly on the expenditure side that we need, and the key challenge is on investment and in terms of inter-regional trade in the United Kingdom. So there are on our plans in the next couple, well, some of my team might be on the call, in the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, perhaps a bit longer, but they are on our plans, but they are the promised land. And as soon as we have those, it means that we've almost filled most of the gaps that we have in terms of the regional space, but we are not quite there yet, I'm afraid.
You know, recently that COVID incidents has shown that many people were talking about all different impact incidents. Some BIM hypothesis or north-south divide, all these things coming up. That's why it is very important to see what are kind of different types of multiplier issues, impacts across the region. It is becoming more important because we have now regional lockdown, regional things. So I think that is why. Yeah, thank you, Darren.
No, I completely agree with you. And what I should say, there are input-output tables for Scotland. They do them.
And for Northern Ireland.
And for Northern Ireland as well.
Yes.
So they do exist for those countries.
Yes.
Yeah. So okay, it is good to know that you are going to make it in Colombia. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, and Sanjeev has said he's got a question, so please go ahead, Sanjeev.
Just checking. Can you hear me, Mary?
Certainly can.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Iain, Mairi, Andrew, and Darren. Very good points. My question or theme is going to be more longer term focus. So I think ONS has responded really well to policy users, government, with the development of a whole range of indicators, as Darren's alluded to, and I think that's really filled in the space. And one of my fears with policymakers has always been, you give them a piece of information that fits in with their mindset, off they go. If it doesn't fit in with their mindset, don't like the data. But they'll talk about evidence-based policy making, blah, blah, blah. We're going to come back to that in a moment. We've got COVID-19 that's forced users and producers to act in very different ways in the short term. And they've done well. Maybe they've struggled in some areas. Hopefully there's not a COVID-20 and a COVID-21. So I've been around for a while, and these things go through cycles, and there's a cyclical nature. Now, regions, sub-regions, the impact of COVID-19 is going to be for a long time in some way, shape or form. We also have, at the end of the year, we're coming out of the EU and Brexit, and that is going to create even more tensions, changes, struggles, challenges, opportunities, region, sub-region, local authority, etc. So there could be another new demand for such lower level statistics. Productivity, welfare, redistribution, sustainability, blah, blah, blah. Levels is one thing, but growth rates is a different thing. The change in growth in the short term can actually tell us a lot. Levels is something different. So where I'm coming from is this. There's a lot of short-termism in the air, and obviously regional on a cyclical nature has become much more important and will be at least next year as well. So where I am struggling to see is the development, instead of taste for the short-termism, is the development for a coherent longer term strategy. Now, what I'm going to do is go back to something called the Allsop review, of which I would say very little has been recommended and holds in place today. So should we now start reviewing that and developing a longer term strategy, including statistical regional hubs, which would tell us these country indicators that says industry X is doing this and the households are doing that and they don't make sense in our region or our local authority, etc. So the regional statistical hubs is one thing, but where I'm coming from is, what are your views on at what point and what channel will a longer term strategy for the regions be developed?
So I'm going to ask the panel an impossible task to combine a response with that with any closing remarks you might have, because you've got about 1 minute each to combine the two. So I'm going to start with Darren, who looks very much up for the challenge.
Oh, I wish I hadn't come off mute first now. That was a mistake, wasn't it? So very quickly, I think Sandy's absolutely spot on here, is that I recognise, I'm sure Andrew and Mairi as users have recognised the priority regional statistics I've had over the last 10, 20 years. It's been very high priority, low priority, high priority, low priority. And that's meant it's been very challenging actually in terms of developing a strategy that's sort of held over time. So I've got a lot of sympathy there. It is a high priority at the moment, and particularly with the levelling up agenda, I don't think that is going to go away at the moment. So we have to strike when the iron is hot. And just by coincidence, there is a spending review cycle going on at the moment. So if you were to look at our spending review bid that we are developing, that does look at the longer term as well as shorter term on the levelling up agenda, which I think that will benefit in terms of the regional statistics users. But going forward, my final remarks, we just need to hear from our users in terms of this. It's been some really good points made here. You know, this balance between the structural surveys and the short-term surveys. How do we proceed both together? Make sure they keep talking together and harmonise. And where there's differences, what's the best way of explaining those? So it's a plea in a way. I agree that we need a longer-term strategic plan. That is it. That is in a hand. Equally, we need the help of our users to help us to develop that going forward.
And very briefly, I completely agree with Darren. You know, in a sense, one of my observations of previous sort of attempts on this regional, national, etc., is essentially there's been an absence on the demand side for those subnational indicators. You know, in a sense, they've been driven by you know, on the supply side, on actually the producer side, which is good, or from the national side, but actually the absence of concerted and considerable demand from users at the local scale. And you know, that's a variable kind of local in that sense, I think has been absent. However, I think if you look at the last 6 or 7 or maybe longer years, and you look forward the next 6, 7, 10 years, I think the demand for usable analysis, usable data by those decision makers out on the ground is only going to increase. And therefore, I would hope that, you know, the brilliant work that Darren and colleagues has been doing, you know, will be given further emphasis and further stimulus to be able to respond to that demand side. I think too much of ALSOP was, in a sense, in part, a supply side response in absence of demand. No one was really demanding it, but we felt it was the right thing to kind of do. So we kind of did it, but it got knocked off by other things. I think now we have real demand from places up and down the country, for example, that won't allow it to be knocked off when the next latest thing becomes relevant. So that will be my kind of final thought on that.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
Thank you. Iain, do you want to go next?
Very quickly, I'd say ditto for the previous contributions, Darren and Andrew. I think the FOSTA indicators have a role up in terms of measuring the recovery, hopefully the recovery. That's what we want to see, I guess, over the next 2 or 3 years. But I think Sanjeev's absolutely right. There has to be a consideration of the longer term strategy. I couldn't agree more about the importance of regional inputs. We identified that to the Treasury Select Committee. So I see that as being really crucial. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And Mairi, do you want to have the final word?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Sanjeev in that I've always thought that the knowledge of local economies is, and in variable senses, again, sorry, Andrew, local, is really important. And, you know, you look at the example of devolved administrations independently developing things which improve what the ONS are doing for regional accounts in the top-down sense. And there's a virtuous circle there. So having local knowledge and local statistics producers is very valuable in improving what ONS do top down, because just because you can necessarily regionalise doesn't mean it's actually representative of local economy. You really need that local knowledge, so they can be a sort of virtuous circle. So I would agree that that sort of knowledge about local economies is really important, so that statistics are actually meaningful and useful for local decision makers.
Thank you very much. And so I think there we've come to the end of our time. So I want to say a huge thank you to each of the panel members, to Darren, Iain, Andrew and Mairi. And that's been a really good discussion. I think we could have carried on for a lot longer and it would have had even more insights, but I think we've taken a lot from what we've had. And thank you very much to the participants who've engaged with this. I think the key takeaways for me were that we've seen some really positive progress and some really good things have come out of these not very pleasant circumstances. But there are obviously challenges remaining, and in order to try and address those challenges, I think we're all going to have to work together, because no one organisation is going to be able to do that on their own. So there's huge benefits from super users, as it were, like Andrew and Mairi, from informing ONS as a producer, but there's also a lot of you as participants can also help in that role of educating, explaining and feeding back on the data. So I think there's a lot of benefit from us collaborating like this, and most of all, thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you
very much, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.